Hey everyone, it's Irene from Bay Wellness Coaching, and today I'm going to be interviewing Ellie about her experiences as a woman climber. Rock climbing is currently a male dominated sport, so I wanted to highlight one woman's experience as a climber. Ellie is an SF based queer climber, backpacker, and photographer. Thanks again, Ellie, for being on the show. So, to start off, how did you get into climbing?
Yeah, so I got into climbing about like 5 years ago, and at the time I was very interested in this one person, and he was going to the gym like twice a week, and I was like, oh, this might be really fun. So he took me one time, and I was basically hooked. Immediately, I was like, I don't care about you. I just care about the rock. I care about the wall. When we were like together, and so I would go to the gym as often as I could, and I would not stop until I had at least two blisters on my hands. And for me, like that's how I know I was like super into it, just like willing to willing to push through the pain of just like my hands physically.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's intense. I have been climbing a couple of times and I think climbing's super fun and I've always been well, I've never really gotten to the point where I describe myself as being good, but it's always such a fun and exhilarating experience. For those viewers who aren't as familiar with climbing as a sport, so I've personally only done indoor climbing, so that's bouldering, where you're not attached to anything, you just climb to the top of the route and you can either climb over to the top and come back down or just climb back down on the same side. And top roping, which you're attached to a little pulley at the top. They could be automatic, where it just automatically drops you down once you've reached the top, or you can be attached to a belayer who will belay and slowly release you down. So, Ellie, do you mind sharing a little bit more about some of the other options in climbing for those people who aren't as familiar?
Sure. Yeah, so there's quite a few different specialties or I guess disciplines within climbing. As Irene mentioned, there's bouldering, there's top roping, there's sport climbing. And so sport climbing is where there are like in, in a rock wall, let's say that this is the rock wall, there are bolts already drilled into the rock. So when you're climbing up with a rope just like at your harness,
Mhm.
and there's nothing above you. There's no rope above you. So as you climb, you are clipping in, let's say that this is the bolt. You're clipping in to the rock wall with your quick draw. This is a quick draw. And then you pull your rope up from your harness and you clip it into here.
Mhm.
And so this is what they categorize this as free climbing because you're not relying on a rope to pull you up. So that's sport. Trad is the like purer form of climbing where there's no bolts drilled into the wall, but you do have like cracks in the normal features of a rock wall. And so when you're climbing, you have gear like cams. This is a cam. And so when you have like a fissure crack in the wall, you like will stick this in, and this has a, a pretty hefty like weight rating. So if you fall on it, like you're not going to pull it out as long as you place it well. So you put this into the into the rock, and then you get your quick draw. And in this case, for trad climbing, it'll usually be a alpine draw, and you'll clip that in, and you'll get this, and this is what you'll clip onto the rope. So it's pretty similar to the quick draw. It's just longer, especially because routes outdoors tend to meander a lot, especially when it's trad. Then there's also ice climbing, where you use ice fixes and you go up. That's pretty intense. I haven't done it yet. That sounds really interesting. And then there's aid climbing, which is similar to trad, somewhat similar to sport, but you use a lot of tools to pull yourself up. So it's kind of like, it's still really intense. They use it for a lot of like big wall or very complicated climbs, but it's a lot less like strength or technique, and it's more um, technique on like how you use the equipment, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, wow, there's like so many types of climbing people could get into. So hopefully somebody's inspired to give it a try. So whether you want to try something indoors where you can feel like a little bit more safe because there's padding on the ground, there's people around, if you get injured, somebody's going to be there. And I've never felt unsafe climbing like inside indoors at the gym. So what's kind of been your experience as a shorter person who climbs? For those who don't know, Ellie is 4'10".
Yeah, so for me, um, I will say it has not been easy. Uh, a lot of climbing routes are generally set by taller white men, basically. And so it's really easy to have this mentality when you're climbing of just like, oh, I'm too short. Like, oh, I can't make that move because I'm just physically too short. I just can't reach it. But when you get attuned enough to the rock and you get attuned enough to your body, you start to realize like you don't need to be tall. You need to like have a very creative mind. And so for me, when I climb, sometimes I'll climb using like the little holes in the wall. I'll just like put my fingers in there and just pull myself up from my finger. Or I'll like think about this crazy sequence of moves to do in order to overcome like a portion of the wall that I couldn't climb before. And so it is still really challenging, especially when people come up to you and they're like, oh, you should be able to do it this way. And you're like, no, I literally cannot, like, I'm just too short. But for them, they're like, oh, no, you're fine, you're fine. And it's like super frustrating. But eventually, when you start to realize like they just want to see you succeed, then you're like, okay, thanks for your information. But, like, I'll do it my own way. I want to like learn how to move my body and attune it to the wall on my own.
Mhm.
So, in that sense, it's definitely been a learning process. And climbing with the right people will definitely help to have that mentality of like it's you against the wall, it's not you and other people against the wall, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, women tend to be shorter than men in general, so it must be a little bit more difficult in that they're not really designed for shorter people in mind. And what's been your experience as a woman climber in a very male-dominated sport?
um it's definitely been pretty interesting, I guess. A lot of my friends in general are male, and so I'm pretty used to not being around a lot of women. But as I start to realize more and more, like it's actually really fantastic to climb with other women because you don't have this whole like I'm gonna throw myself at the wall and like burly myself up. They actually move differently, and they also talk about their bodies differently, and they hold themselves differently. And so it's very interesting to have that community of women who are climbers who know also what you're going through. Um, and although there aren't a lot of women climbers compared to men climbers, it's still when you have that community there, it's like so interesting and it's so eye opening. Like, oh, this is what I've been missing this whole time. Um, and it's also nice to have that like camaraderie as well. Like, you can't. It's a little bit harder to relate to certain things with other male climbers, but when you have those female climbers, you just relate to them so much more.
Yeah, I've noticed that experience too when I've gone climbing. My neighbor, she's brought me climbing a couple times with her to her gym, and she kind of mentioned to me like, "Oh, like I don't climb as much as I used to because a lot of the other girls who I used to climb with here are not here anymore, or they moved, or other things." And she's just like, she doesn't feel as motivated to go because like a lot of the guys just try to like really, really push her to the point where she's like not even she doesn't enjoy going as much. So it's really glad to hear that you've made a lot of community and you've found value in being there with other women. I know you're involved with a couple of organizations. You're a board member for the Bay Area Climbers Coalition and a team member / ambassador for Petite Ascension and Lady Crush Crew. What got you interested in giving back to the community?
So I realized when I started getting really comfortable with climbing and being outdoors, um, I realized that like, man, through climbing, I have become so much more confident in myself and so much more confident in my abilities. And I'm proud of like my body for the first time in like basically ever. Um, and I realized like I want to share this too. I want to create spaces where women, people of color, queer folk, they all can congregate in a space where they feel safe and they feel supported and they feel like they can grow and get tools, learn tools in how to be confident in themselves and how to just like trust themselves, Um, and because I had that experience, I was like, well, shoot, like I remember being someone who like didn't believe that I could backpack for 20 miles in a weekend, or I remember being that person who like wasn't confident in like building things and having those experiences and you know overcoming the feeling of like it's okay to fall, it's okay to like not send your project, it's totally fine, you learned something and you grew. And that brought me to like, well, making the outdoor spaces more equitable for others who might not have the opportunity, giving them a safe space, and also just acknowledging that I have a lot of privileges to be able to enjoy these spaces, to be able to have the resources, to be able to go and enjoy these spaces in the way that I do, and being able to give back to my local climbing and in general just outdoor communities or nonprofits has become a big goal of mine for the last year or so, and will be for quite a while.
Ah, that's really amazing. That's amazing. I think it's great to make different sports accessible to more people, like people of color, women, queer people, just making a space where people feel welcome to be themselves. And especially in a sport where you're literally putting your body like up and could potentially fall or even get hurt, to just have like a support system and a trust system there in place. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's interesting that you say that, because when you do climb with people, especially sport climbing or trad climbing, sometimes even bouldering, you are literally putting your life in other people's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy to think like when you start climbing to these different uh, specialties within the sport, like you basically create like a ride or die crew, which is insane. Like I know now like specific people who I literally trust my life with, which is crazy. Like I wouldn't have thought that I would have that ever, but I do.
Yeah, that's
That's what climbing
amazing.
is. Yeah.
Ah, that's so great. That's so good to hear. And then you also mentioned that you're a certified wilderness first responder. How did that come about, and what was the process like in the certification?
Yeah, so I realized while climbing outside quite often, especially in remote areas, that if people get injured, or if I'm backpacking, people get injured, seriously injured or whatever, like what am I gonna do, And um, with one of my high level goals, which is like make the outdoors accessible to everyone, part of it is also making sure that it's done in a safe way. And if it so happens that I can't mitigate risks or whatever, and I'm bringing people outdoors and something happens, like I need to be able to triage their issues and like keep them alive for as long as possible before we can get them to like a hospital or whatever. And being someone who did get injured outdoors, I was like, this is super important. Like I need to know how to like stabilize someone's ankle if they fall and break it like I did.
Mhm.
um, and just being prepared, knowing that I have the power to keep someone alive is already like strength that I didn't have before. It's more confidence and more comfort in being in the outdoors. So I broke my ankle last year, March, in Las Vegas, actually climbing. And when I was healing, I was like, well, shoot, no one in my group knew what to do with my ankle. I should I should probably figure it out. And I was looking around, asking around, like, oh, what are some trainings that I can do? And my roommate did wilderness first aid, but he mentioned like, oh, wilderness responders course is more intense, and there's more things that you can do with it. And so I was like, heck yeah, let's do it. And so it was like a week long course. In shoot, I forget where it was. Near Bishop, I think, Bishop, California. And they just like run you through drills. They give you tests. They train you. It was super intense. I like felt stressed out every day that we were there.
Oh
Like, oh
gosh.
shoot, I'm gonna flunk out. You know, I spent a lot of money on this course. I'm not doing so well. But you know, that's they train you like that because they want to instill upon you like you can't be comfortable, you can't be complacent,
Mhm,
because when you do that, you make mistakes.
mhm,
And you don't want to make mistakes, especially when it comes to people's lives.
mhm,
And so since then, I got my certification, which is really cool because it includes advanced life support, which is a little bit beyond like just basic CPR.
mhm.
They also give you a epinephrine card, I think, so you can get like a prescription for yourself from your doctor, um, just in case like someone in your group has a reaction that you need to like provide an epi dosage to them,
Mhm.
um, along with some other more advanced trainings that you don't normally get in like uh, the WIFA classes.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing to hear, like how empowered you are now, and like you could be saving people's lives. Like I've done basic first aid, CPR, AED training, but I know in the class that I took specifically, they'll tell you like, oh, if you're out there in the wilderness and you're someone who climbs a lot or does a bunch of like outdoor activities, you could consider doing like a outdoor first aid class or something. Because yeah, like if somebody breaks their foot, like how are you going to help them get, back to the start of the trail where there would be other people to help you. So that's really cool that you ended up doing that. And hopefully you won't need to use it, but you have the strength and capability and confidence to help when you need that. Speaking of empowerment, since it is part of our Pride Month series, like what's been your experience as a queer person in the climbing community?
So I haven't really become super loud and out up until pretty recently. And people who knew me, like they knew that I was queer, but I never wore like rainbow anything to like kind of announce to random strangers that, you know, like I'm queer. But um, it's become more and more important to me to make sure that like I am signaling to people that, hey, I am like a person who is queer, who is, you know, Asian woman also. I'm enjoying these spaces. I am safe. You know, you're safe with me, and we have that camaraderie. So I've been trying to increase uh, my like announcementship of like my identities, and it's been strange trying to find groups in Bay Area that are um, queer climbers has been kind of hard actually. Touchstone gyms, they do have uh, the, I want to say it's like called Queer Crush, and it's like a meetup for each of their gyms. They have like once a month meetups for queer crushers, and that's pretty cool. They're a pretty good community, but my gyms, the Planet Granite uh, gyms in the area, they don't actually have that, and so um, I don't really know too many climbers in my gym that are queer, but when I am with other queer climbers, it's pretty interesting to see just how diverse they are and what their stories are and how they came into climbing and how they are interacting with the climbing world, because it's so much more different than if you were like a straight person who felt safe kind of anywhere, right?
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome that you've been able to be more out, be more open with people, and kind of just that visibility will make a space more comfortable for other people being there. Um, and then I do want to ask a little bit about body image issues in the climbing community. Do you mind elaborating a little bit about that?
Sure. So with any physical sport, um, there will be some sort of body image issue within, you know, the community, within people who are very competitive. And some people through the sport, you know, they'll find more strength in their body in their body image, whereas other people might think of their body as limitations. And so climbing is such an interesting sport where you don't necessarily want to be bulky. Like you don't want to be like the super strong, hella buff person. The more ideal, quote unquote, like body type is they're skinny and scrawny and you're flexible, which leads to this really weird thing where, like, if you're tall and you're heavier, you'll start to gain this mentality of just like, oh, I need to be skinny. And it's also then very easy for people who are competitive to not eat as much, right? Not nourish their bodies and try to fit this stereotype of, I need to be skinny. So we've had in the climbing community, we've had people come forward, like pro athletes say, tell their stories of their struggles with food, with their nutrition. And so one example that comes to mind is Kai Leitner. He's like this young, actually pretty tall, Black pro athlete who's been in the climbing community since he was small. And his story is like, for the longest time, he was told, you need to be skinny. And so he would eat less. He would basically become like this really skinny kid who still climbs strong, but probably not as strong as he would have if he had been eating, the way his body needed. And we have stories like Beth Rodden, who is a mother of, a child. And for the longest time, her body issues were like, when she was growing up and she was in the pro circuit, she was told also to be really skinny. And so she would also have a bad relationship with food too. And you see a side-by-side image of like her when she was younger, really competitive. She'd be like so skinny. It was like scary. And she was like, oh yeah, I weighed like, 110 pounds or something. And you would just be like, how did you survive? And then you see her now and she's like a mom and she has like, belly wrinkles. And she's like, I don't care. I'm going to wear my sports bra and just climb. And like, this is my body. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what it's done. And like, it's interesting to hear that. And it's also interesting to absorb that as like, a woman climber. So for me now, I'm like, heck yeah, my body is strong too. Like I can't get up that like V4. I can't get up that like V2, whatever. It's fine. I don't care because I am strong and like my body has changed in so many different ways through climbing that like, it doesn't matter. Like grades, routes, whatever, I'm happy with where I am. And getting to that point for a lot of climbers is still a struggle. It's still a journey, especially when the messaging is like, you need to be skinny.
Wow.
It's so interesting.
Yeah. It sounds very different than some of the other sports where like getting built and getting real bulky is like a big thing. And the people who are really naturally thinner feel like, oh, I need to eat more and like bulk as much as possible so like they can like fit in at the gym or whatnot. And it's unfortunate to hear, but I mean, it's also like amazing to hear that there's people who are very open and honest about their struggles and their journeys, and people can, be able to feel comfortable in being themselves. If like these star athletes can have these issues, then it's understandable that an everyday person might as well.
Yeah, and I would caution too, like, if you're someone who's interested in climbing or you are a climber, when you hear people say like, oh, I'm too heavy to get up this rock, just be like, no, you're not too heavy. You just need like more flexibility or more strength, things that you can work on rather than just like, oh, I need to eat less or, like I need to do an unhealthy amount of cardio or something. Because I have friends who do that too. And I'm just like, yeah, you can do that, or you can work on your flexibility. You can work on being dynamic or something else, like more healthier body image. Like you can help perpetuate that healthy body image.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's, I think, for people who are not as involved in the climbing community, that would be something that like we're not as familiar with. So thanks. I guess in terms of our last question, what's next for you in your outdoors life?
Yeah, so I mean, with COVID, can't really do much right now, but I'm still trying to do more things outdoors. So I hope to create more backpacking trips for women POC queer groups that I'm a part of. Backpacking trips, climbing trips, teaching people how to climb outdoors, both like top rope, trad, bouldering, making, hopefully helping people become empowered through the sport. Um, and also, I'm trying to join a search and rescue team in California just in case. Hopefully, in the hopes that I can contribute to those groups. You know, finding people who are lost and learning a lot of different skills along the way.
Awesome. That's super exciting. Well, that pretty much sums it up for our conversation today. Thank you again, Ellie, for being on the show. I learned a lot about the climbing community, and hopefully, this will inspire some more people to give the sport a try. If you want to find out more about Ellie's climbing, you can check out her Instagram at Climbing Walrus and take a look and see what she's been up to. So, thanks again for being on the show. Signing off as always, deep breath in, deep breath out. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.